What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another Retro Yu-Gi-Oh video and back with another Perfect Circle format video, the format based around the January 2008 SJC Orlando. And this was a really fun format to cover. I'm really glad I got to go on a deep dive through all the various decks in it. But this will be the end of the road for my regular Perfect Circle coverage. Don't worry, we're going to be continuing on into Dad Return and beyond, into the 5Ds era very soon, so that'll be very exciting. I hope that even if you are sort of the type of player who, when Synchros came out, they're like, oh, no, I don't want that, I don't like that, I don't like seeing a new summon mechanic, hopefully you still stick around for the journey on the channel, because I think that if you try out some of these formats, maybe they'll be a bit better than you expect. But either way, if you want a good format to try out, Perfect Circle is that format. The format's very, very fun. A lot of cool decks running around, a lot of cool strategy, and nothing's too broken, right? Perfect Circle Monarch definitely does dominate a bit, but you can play some other decks as well. And there are some cool archetypes to play around with as well. Gladiator is definitely a cool archetype to play around with, but don't expect to be winning that much if you do play around with it. I feel like the deck is just, it struggles a fair bit. The idea of it is that you're playing with a bunch of clouds, so these monsters cannot really be destroyed by battle because, you know, if your opponent attacks into it, they sort of disperse, come back together, all that stuff. And so they can't be destroyed by battle, but they are destroyed if they're switched to face-up defense position. So if your opponent's playing like enemy controller or things like that, then you definitely are suffering there. But also, you're taking a lot of damage because these things generally have low attack. Now, there are some ways to mitigate that by just setting up a board of Gladians on your field and backing it up with Spirit Barrier, which is a continuous trap. So while you control a monster, you take no battle damage. So that is a staple in this deck. We are playing 3 of those. But unfortunately, like, because the Gladiator has such low attack, even if you can protect yourself, you don't really have a way to finish off the game. There are some Gladiator boss monsters. I think the better of the two is Gladiator Nimbus Man. We actually have it in the side deck here because I do think that it could be something to bring in if you do need a big body to actually beat over things with. And this is one that just, you know, basically gains attack for each fog counter on it, which is their other gimmick, that they place fog counters on themselves and other things, and then can use those fog counters for effects. So you've got this thing on field, gains 500 attack for each fog counter on it, and if you are playing something like Clouding Squall, which puts a fog counter on every monster on the field, every standby phase, or every one of your standby phases, that is very important, then this thing can just keep gaining attack every turn. You can also use things like Fog Control to tribute one of your other Cloudians, put 3 fog counters on the Nimbus Man, and sort of buff it up even more. But I honestly feel like the way to play this deck is just sort of trying to accumulate advantage, because some of your Gladiators actually do have the ability to remove your opponent's cards if they get enough fog counters. The main ones being Acid Cloud and Suro Stratus here. Those can each remove 2 fog counters from themselves, and then they can either target a Spell Trap on field in the case of Acid Cloud and target a monster in the case of Suro Stratus and destroy it. And Altus is another way to get a fair amount of advantage, because this thing can rip cards from your opponent's hand, and you don't have to remove fog counters from itself, but you can remove them from anywhere on the field. But, you know, you do have to remove 3, so it's a bit of a bigger cost than something like an Acid Cloud or a Suro Stratus, but the fact that you can remove them from anywhere on the field is very nice, especially if you're putting fog counters on your opponent's monster with things like Gladiator Squall, so that is very good there. But the last of the main deck Gladiator that we're really playing is Gladiator Turbulence here. This is an 800 attack, 0 defense point monster, and this just allows you to remove 1 fog counter from it, and you can spell summon out a Gladiator Smoke Ball. Now, the main way that you'd be using this thing is to get more Gladiators on field to then buff up the counters that your other Gladiators are getting, but you can also use this to just get some advantage, right? Like, we are only playing 1 Smoke Ball because we're planning on getting this thing off the field as soon as possible after we bring it out, so we're playing things like the Fog Control that I mentioned, where you contribute the Smoke Ball and convert that into fog counters. We can also use it with Spiritual Water Out Owie to just convert the Smoke Ball into a hand rip that's pretty free, and you can just keep recycling the thing. It can actually bring out from the graveyard as well, so unless your opponent DD Crows it, which is a possibility, which is why we have 2 more Smoke Balls in the side deck, unless your opponent DD Crows it, you'll be able to just get this sort of resource loop online as long as you have enough counters to remove from the Turbulence. And using things like Fog Control and Gladiator Squall, you can even, you know, buff up your opponent's monsters to 4 more Cloud counters, fog counters that is, and use Diamond Dust Cyclone to destroy those monsters and then draw a card. So in a way, this is sort of like a really janky Gemini Spark. If you're familiar with Eden's format and you know about like Hero Beat, using Gemini Spark to tribute one of your Gemini monsters and pop an opponent's monster, then draw a card. You can kind of do a similar thing here with Diamond Dust Cyclone, although it's a lot harder to set up, but that is sort of one of the few ways we actually have to both destroy and draw cards. So it is, I think, worth playing in this deck, because we kind of do want to just draw deeper into our deck when we can. And if we're popping a thing on top of that, then that's very good. For the other monsters in the main deck, we've got a Sangan to search out any of our Cloudians, and we've also got a triple copies of Rise of the Storm Monarch here. This is because your Cloudians are not going to be destroyed by battle, so you can basically treat them like a Spirit Reaper or Marshmallow occasionally, and just have them on a field, then tribute for a Rise to spin something back and hope that that's enough. Now, this can be a bit hurt by the fact that people are playing Pulling the Rugs in the main oftentimes, because it's very good against Perfect Circle Monarch, but to be fair, all your Cloudian monsters are also hit by Pulling the Rug, so if they're using Pulling the Rug, they might as well just use it on a Cloudian, and then you're not really caring about that anyways, but you can't even bring out the Ryza if you don't have any Cloudians on field. So for the trap cards, we've also got a Call of the Haunted to bring back our monsters. Now, the Cloudians can't trigger on, special summon. They just trigger on normal summon. But if you bring out a Cloudian, it can potentially be the difference between having 1 or 2 fog counters on a Zero Stratus or something like that when that gets normal summoned. So I do think the Call of the Haunted is still worth playing in this deck. And also, if you get out at least 1 Ryza, you can then bring it back and do stuff with it. So that's pretty good. We're playing a full suite of counter traps with Treaty, Dark Bribe, and 3 Solemn Judgment. We want this to protect things like our Spirit Barriers, for instance, and just stop if our opponent has anything that's kind of nasty to disrupt our plays, we can stop them with that. We've also got a Mirror Force and then the 3 Spiritual Water Aoi and 3 Spirit Better that I mentioned earlier. But Mirror Force is just a way to deal with our opponent's aggression there. So for the side deck, I mentioned the Smoke Balls and the Nimbus Man. We also have double Snail. We've got a Mystical Space Typhoon, and then we've got triple Dust Tornado here. These are mainly to deal with things that stop our traps, because we are a very trap-focused deck, although we're not only a trap-focused deck. We do have ways to deal with things like Jinzo, for instance, if it does come up, but they are a bit hard to set up sometimes. So we really do want to be able to shut off the ways that our opponent can actually negate our traps. That's why we're playing these. We also got triple Pulling the Rug for if we're up against Perfect Circle Monarch, and we've got triple Spell Shield type 8 for if we're up against the deck that's playing a bunch of spells that target our monsters like Econ, because Econ is really, really bad for this deck. It kind of just hoses it. So, yeah, we have these in the side as well. For the fusion deck, I just put in every water fusion that's existed up to this point because, we're never going in the fusion deck, so it doesn't really matter here. But without further ado, let's dive into some games and see how this deck actually plays. So the first people that we have here is against Clemens 12, a freaking guest on the channel. Always a pleasure to have them on, and we're going to be diving in to the games here. And now, in general, with the Perfect Circle videos, I try and get a video against Perfect Circle Monarch because I feel like it's a good showcase for what the decks can do against the most popular deck in the format. But for this video, Cloudians are jank enough that I just sort of have 2 matches here against decks that are just in the format, right? Like, they're not the most common things, but it sort of just shows how much Cloudians can lose to certain jank strategies. Now, I just summon out the Cloudian Termians and don't summon out the Smoke Ball. I could get punished if I draw Smoke Ball off the top, but I figure it's better to do this because I can save it for when I normal summon a Cloudian next turn, right? Because they're just going to attack over the Smoke Ball here if I bring it out now. So I figure I can just leave it like this. I've got a Spirit Barrier to protect the Turbulence. I've got Solemn and Dark Bribe if they do anything else. I could have set the other Dark Bribe in hand, but I didn't want to clog up my spell trap zones because that is something that could happen. Spirit Barrier doesn't go away, and if I just have a bunch of spell traps that are clogging up my zones and I draw a Cloudian Squall, for instance, then I'm just shut off from using my spell trap zones in the future. Now, I will likely be using these counter traps to stop what my opponent's doing, but I do think it's still important to note that. So my opponent's going to flip a bit of Koichi. We're just going to let that go through. That doesn't really stop our plays here. They're going to go for a Roto. We're also going to let that go through. No real point in Dark Bribing this. They draw into a DD Warrior Lady, or not draw into, but, they search into a DD Warrior Lady, and that is a bit of a problem for us. They can attack into our Turbulence, and we can bring out Acid Cloud, but Acid Cloud doesn't really do anything on its own there. We kind of want to get the Smoke Ball out of deck. So I do think it actually is better to do Solemn Judgment this, just to stop the DD Warrior Lady from doing its thing. And just leave it in a point where, we actually have Cloudians on field to sort of set up our other Cloudian effects. So this might have been a bit, too hasty on my part, but I do have other Dark Bribes and stuff to negate whatever else they're doing. So I feel like I am pretty comfortable overall with what they've got. We draw into a Ryza, so that's actually an even better use of the Cloudian Smoke Ball. We can tribute that for a Ryza. You could also argue that we just summon out the Acid Cloud, pop their back row, and leave it at that, save the Ryza for the next turn. But I figure this actually is a bit of a better play just to get a little bit more aggressive because I don't necessarily want to lead them with that Koichi on field doing stuff. So I can summon out Ryza, bait out their back row. If it is something to stop the Ryza, then it still trades 1 for 1. Right? Whatever my play is doing here is going to be stopping whatever that back row is or just using it in some way. So my opponent won't have access to it really. And so I can just go for this. And then next turn I can summon out Acid Cloud, still pop that back row and just, potentially get in for more damage. And I do think I do need to get aggressive here to try and get in as much damage as I can, because this deck can't really kill easily. As I mentioned before in the deck breakdown, the monsters are all very weak, so Ryza is one of the few monsters that we have that can actually do something. They're going to go for a pre-mat here and target the Warrior Lady, and I actually decide to Dark Bribe that. We've got 2 Dark Bribes, so I figure we can save or use one on this. I don't necessarily want the Ryza being gone here because, you know, I don't really have other things that can deal with their monsters yet. I don't have a Zero Stratus. So I want this to be on field. I can then go Acid Cloud, pop their back row, and have access to that. I've got another Dark Bribe. They do have ways to deal with the Ryza or things like that otherwise. And they do have the DD Assailant here. I don't actually Dark Bribe this, although I maybe should have, just to keep the Ryza online, because, you know, I don't know what exactly they're searching out. And if it's Exiled Force, they still are having no monsters on field. If it's like DD Assailant, which it was, they still have no monsters on field, so it's not the worst thing in the world. I can summon an Acid Cloud, try and pop that back row, and I will indeed do that to get rid of that. It's a Dust Shoot that was dead, so I guess that was what they set beforehand. Then we're going to attack in for 13. Not the most damage, but they are at 34, so that is pretty weak on their side. We can activate a Clouding Squall here, so this will buff up the Turbulence, buff up the Acid Cloud later. But then they draw into Breaker. Breaker is actually very annoying for us because that can pop our Spirit Barrier, and now we're taking damage every turn. We're at 4,000 life points already from the Solemn activation. Now we're in a bit of a tough spot. So we do get counters on both these things. We can bring out a Turbulence just to buff it up to 3 counters, just to have more counters on field in case we draw into like Altus, which can remove counters on anything. But yeah, it is just kind of rough because we're taking a lot of damage from the Acid Cloud here. I could have potentially switched the Acid Cloud to defense, popped it, and then taken less damage here, but ultimately that's 300 less damage overall. I don't think that 300 damage will end up mattering at this point in the game. It might, but I feel like it's just better to leave it on field because I can pop a Spell Trap next turn if I've got that. But yeah, it's not really the best here. I go for a Clouding Turbulence counter to bring back a Smoke Ball because I'm going to trade the counter for basically a counter on Altus anyways. Because, like, I'm going to summon on Altus, get a counter for the Smoke Ball, and the Turbulence would have a counter anyways, so it doesn't really matter overall here. And this thing's going to have 5 counters total, so I can actually rip their entire hand away. Because the Breaker actually has 2 counters already, so I can actually deal with that. So, or actually, maybe it only has, no, it has 2 counters because it's attacked over the Acid Cloud twice. So, yeah, I'll be able to rip apart their entire hand here, which is actually kind of wild. Altus hand ripping for 4 this turn. So, you know, most decks, if they actually manage to hand rip for 4, they're winning the game, right? But unfortunately, we're playing Cloudians, which don't have really a way to capitalize on that. We'll switch our Acid Cloud to defense because now I think we're at low enough life that the 300 life points might matter. If they draw in another monster, they can attack over it. But I feel like Turbulence, I mean, I don't know. The 300 life points could matter, but hopefully our Turbulence will be good enough. Unfortunately, with the Sangan there, that'll actually be exact damage into our life points here. 200 over the Turbulence, 800 over the Turbulence, then 600 over the Turbulence. That does add up to... Oh, wait, actually, that doesn't add up to... Oh, okay, I miscalculated here. I thought this was actually lethal. It was not. So actually, we could have potentially been in a better spot here because... Well, we wouldn't have been able to... No, we would have been in a bad spot no matter what because we'd be down to 200 life points if we go, you know... top deck Zero Stratus, that's the best case scenario. Go Zero Stratus, pop the Decoichi, pop the Breaker. We can't pop the Sangan because it would only have, you know, 5 counters on it. So we'd have 1 counter left on the Zero Stratus. We'd be able to hand rip whatever else they've got in hand with the Altus. But we are still in a spot where we're losing the game basically because we've got 200 life points. They can attack over it for 100 life points because we'd have to switch these Turbulences to defense there. And yeah, it's just not going to go well for us. So I did miscalculate the damage here. We still would have been alive, but I don't actually think it would have ended up mattering here overall. So we're going to go into the next one here and see how we do. So we don't really bring in too much side deck stuff because I feel like we don't have any targeted side deck stuff for what they're playing. It seems to be a Strike Ninja deck, like a Strike Ninja return deck. So we don't really have any stops for that. It doesn't really do anything that we can really, you know, counterplay with. But anyways, we just summon out an Altus, activate the Squall and Mirror Force here. We could set the Owie as well. The way I figure it is that, like, I mean, I probably should have set the Owie. I just don't want to play in a Heavy Storm because if they go Heavy Storm here, I have to Owie, tribute the Altus, and then we're in kind of a really bad spot. So I don't want to play in a Heavy Storm. I figure I'll set these, and then I can have the Owie online later. I also don't want to lose the Altus right now because it's my tribute for Ryza. It gets counters out on every turn for Clouding Squall, so I'd prefer to save the Owie for something like a Smoke Ball instead of the Altus. So I do this. I may get a little bit punished for it, but it looks like I'm not getting punished for it yet. So they're just going to set 3 to play around the hand rip, which I think makes sense. We run into Smoke Ball, which is a great pairing with Owie, so I'm glad I saved the Owie until they activate Dust Tornado on the Owie. We lose that, and now we can't tribute the Smoke Ball. And they actually have a Brain Con here, so that's going to be very unfortunate because we could have actually stopped this play with the Owie. by trading the smoke ball, but unfortunately they did Dust Tornado the right thing there. I could have played around Dust Tornado by saying the Dust Cyclone as well, but I feel like that's kind of not the best to do. Because I don't know, it's just kind of rough. And unfortunately, they've got Jinzo to shut off our remaining traps like Mirror Force, so now we're just kind of cooked. I probably would have taken the Jinzo here, and they might not have had a way to tribute out the Altis. Yeah, they just had a guard. So, we would have been in a potentially different spot if I had set the Owie beforehand on the first turn, but I wanted to play around Heavy Storm, so a bit tricky there. But we do have sort of like a pseudo win con coming down the pipeline, potentially if we can get enough counters on the Jinzo. We've got Diamond Dice Cyclone to potentially pop it, draw a card. Mirror Force will be online then, and then we can do stuff with that. But unfortunately, we just draw into Turbulence, which is not really the best. We do have to summon that. If we set it and they attack over, it's automatically destroyed, so it's not really worth doing. And we can just bring out this Smoke Ball. And I don't think it will matter for us, but yeah, it will definitely not matter. They've got a guard here, which can bounce back our Turbulence. And now this is lethal damage. So yeah, that's a bit of a rough one. Our Diamond Dust Cyclones are not really going to do much against that, but it wasn't the only game I got against Clemens 12. They actually wanted to play a different deck against this, so let's see what deck they brought in the second match that we played here. So we got the second match that we played here against Clemens 12, and let's see how we do. So we are going second here, unfortunately, and this is a pretty good hand until they reveal that they're on Gladiator Beasts. That is the probably worst matchup for this deck in the format, because your deck's basically relying on the fact that, like, okay, they can't attack over my monsters, and I've got Spirit Barrier up, so I'm not taking damage from it. But the thing is, Gladiator Beasts can just dismantle a Spirit Barrier Cloudian board because they just attack into your Cloudians. It's a free Gladiator Beast tag out, so they can either go for Bestiari to pop your Spirit Barrier, or just Murmilla to pop your monsters, and then save the Bestiari for later. It's just really, really bad, so this is a super, super rough matchup for us. It will be definitely very hard to get out of this. So we go for Acid Cloud. It's a mandatory effect, so it doesn't get a fog counter on it. But unfortunately, because it's mandatory and it activates on normal summon, it is pulling the rug bait. So they are going to pulling the rug that. And that's going to be a bit rough for us. I do think that we have to, Mirror Force this Laquari. Just go for that because we can't afford for them to get Bestiari in here and pop our back row. So either way, this trade's 1-for-1 with that Laquari there. They're going to set 2, pass back to us. I draw into another Solemn. I'm going to set that. And it's looking pretty bleak for us. They set 1, pass back to us. We draw an Altis here, so we can summon out that Altis. Just get a counter on it, pass back to them. We just need to set up our Cloudians right now. If they summon out a Glad Beast, we've got Judgment, so we can just Judgment the summon of it. It's obviously not the best, but it is what we've got. We're going to go for Acid Cloud here, put 2 counters on it, and now we've actually got a choice. We could take away all counters from our monsters here to rip a card out of hand, or we could rip a Spell Trap in their back row with the Acid Cloud there. So I ultimately decided to use the Acid Cloud instead of the Altis just to pop some back row, and we hit a Dimpriz. So I'm not too upset about hitting that. They're going to go for a Call the Haunted on the Laquari there. Would have liked to have hit that more. Since we can't afford the Laquari coming out, we have to Solemn Judgment that. They're going to set 1, pass back to us. We draw into an Altis here. We're going to summon out that Altis, get 3 counters on it. And then we're going to use the effect of the Altis that has 1 counter on it. This is to play around something like Divine Wrath or Enemy Controller or something like that. Enemy Control actually doesn't matter because they can just switch. Actually, wait, does it matter? No, because it's a cost. So it doesn't actually matter because if they Enemy Controller chain to Altis, then it doesn't really matter which one they pick. They'd probably just pick the one that we left a counter on. So it wouldn't really matter there with Econ, but Divine Wrath, it actually does matter because this means that, if they Divine Wrath one of our Altises, we still have another on field. But I actually probably should have done the one with just 3 counters on it because it removes fog counters for cost. So the Divine Wrath would negate the one that had nothing on it if I did the one with 3 counters on it. So, or I could have just taken the counters off in a different way to just leave one on the other Altis that I didn't activate the effect on. So probably what I should have done. But at the end of the day, this is sort of like micromanaging around a card that is very unlikely to come up. But we draw into Zero Stratus, so now we can finally get popping their monsters. So we summon out the Zero Stratus. They do have Econ to stop the Zero Stratus, and we are going to chain an Owie to that. That's one of the powerful things about Owie, is that if you're doing something that your opponent can trade 1-for-1 into one of your Cloudians, you can basically make it a worse trade for them by using the Owie, ripping a card of their hand as well. So we're just going to get a peek at their hand, see that they've got Heavy, Shrink, and DD Crow. We want to take the Heavy because obviously we don't want them heavy in our back row. So yeah, we're leading them with a DD Crow and a Shrink. So luckily DD Crow didn't hit us too much unless we want to go for Smoke Ball plays, which is kind of unfortunate. Basically makes the Turbulences kind of bricks in our deck, but we're going to go for the Call on it on the Zero Strats just for that reason. We're trying to bluff that we have a way to get counters on the Zero Strats. We kind of do because we've got this Fog Control in hand and Fog Control on field as well. So we can actually tribute something like our Acid Cloud or just one of our duplicate Altises and then put 3 counters on the Cirrostratus. So either way, I think this works out well for us if we resolve the Conodont or if we don't. And it looks like they're just going to not mess around. They're just going to banish that Cirrostratus from our grave. Luckily, we draw another one, so we can summon that out. We'll be fine by them. It's got 4 counters. We can go pop their monster with 2, and then we're going to think about this and ultimately go for the Altis to remove the remaining fog counters on the field to rip a card out of their hand, just in case. So we hit a DD Crow again, so it seems like they drew into another one. We know about Shrink in hand. They probably have Mirror Force on field, I would assume. That's probably why they didn't heavy earlier, because it's a very powerful card, but we do have the Solemn for the Mirror Force, and I do think it is worth Solemning that Mirror Force here. Now, there are some situations where we are cooked, but when we have this big of a board, it's a bit less likely they'll be completely cooked than in a different situation. For instance, if they want to pop one of our Cloudians, they have to go for a Murmillo here, and Murmillo popping one of our Cloudians is kind of bad because we need to just attack over it with our remaining Cloudians here. If they go for Bestiary, pop one of our back row, that is a bit unfortunate, but it means that they're not popping our Cirrostratus, which means that we can fog control, put 3 counters on the Cirrostratus, and then pop the Bestiary after they've used the effect. So I think either way, we're in a good spot here if they bring out a Gladiator Beast, and we are just going to Solemn the Mirror Force there to stop that from going through. So kind of wild that we're getting to this position with Cloudians, but like, I think this is kind of not necessarily, a positive thing for Cloudians. It's more a negative thing for Glad Beast that if you don't draw Glad Beast, or if your opponent's able to just keep you off Glad Beast, the Glad Beast deck really does suffer. And we're going to set that fog control from our hand just to be able to use it on our turn potentially if we need it, and they're going to MST that fog control. That's perfectly fine. You'll happily take that trade. They go for a Diplomas here. Now we have a couple different options here. We could potentially fog control the Acid Cloud, put 3 counters on one of our other monsters, and then they'd have to use up the Shrink if they wanted to attack in with Diplomas here. But honestly, it's just the same thing that I mentioned earlier, where like they don't really have the best Glad Beast to actually go into here. So I figure we can just set up a Spirit Barrier and not take damage from this and see what they bring out. They're going to bring out a Bestiary here, and they're going to pop our set card. That's fine. We can chain the Fog Control, tribute probably one of the duplicate Altises. No, we actually do tribute the Acid Cloud. I think that makes sense because we're not really going to get more counters on that Acid Cloud unless we draw in another Fog Control and put it on. So I'll just put 3 counters on the Cirrostratus. Leave them with Diplomas not really being a good draw here because, again, if they want to do Diplomas into one of our monsters, they have to shrink it. So it's using up another card there. But I feel like this is a pretty good game state. We're going to go for Cirrostratus, pop the Bestiary here. And now we do lose to Torrential Tribute by doing this play. That is a risk for going for the Turbulence here. I could have held it just to play around that a bit. But honestly, I feel like while we have game potentially on board, we want to go for it. We know about the Shrink, so it's not quite game, but we can still go bring out a Smoke Ball here and try and get in for potentially lethal, because that's 200 plus 2600 plus 800 plus 900. So all told, that's going to be 4,500 damage. So they're going to have to just shrink on one of our Altises, but that'll drop them down to 150 life points, which is, pretty good for us. Pre-match shut off, Brain Con shut off. So I feel pretty good about this overall. And if they don't have anything here, we just win the game on the following turn. So yeah, they are going to shrink down our Altis and go down to 150 life points here. And we are going to feel pretty good about that. There was some confusion about the math there, but they are indeed at 150. And they just draw into a Book of Moon, which will not help them here. So that's just going to be the end of the game. So somehow we managed to pull out game 1 against Glad Beast. That is wild because Glad Beast is definitely Cloudian's worst matchup in the format. But, they just didn't draw their Glad Beast. They didn't draw ways to get into their Glad Beast. And that is where the Glad Beast deck can suffer. If they don't draw into that, their deck's just kind of shut off. So kind of unfortunate for them. And we just got to hope we can get lucky with game 2 here. So we're going to start with a Turbulence, because Turbulence is kind of the weakest of the Cloudians we've got here. We want Acid Cloud and Cirrostratus to stay on field much more than we want the Turbulence to stay on field. So they're going to Pulling the Rug that. I figured that they probably would keep the Pulling the Rugs in the deck post-siding. And then we're just going to go for Squall plus Judgment here. We mainly have Judgment in case they go for a Glad Beast. We want to shut that off because, again, we don't really have the tools to deal with that. But now we actually do with Acid Cloud. We can potentially save the Acid Cloud to pop the back row here, so we might not want to attack into it, but I figure that they probably took out Dimpriz because Dimpriz is kind of bad against our deck. A lot of the time, we just will not be attacking until we can clear the back row of major threats. So I figured they might have Mirror Force, but if they want to use Mirror Force on Acid Cloud, I'm perfectly fine with that, but otherwise I can just attack in here and be fine. Like, I doubt it's probably Dimpriz, but unfortunately it is indeed Dimpriz. So they did manage to keep that in. Maybe they just didn't have any other things to side in against our deck, but I feel like it's not the best against Cloudians, honestly, so I was not expecting it. I did not play around it, and maybe that was a mistake on my part, because if I had kept the Acid Cloud out, it would have gained another counter with the Squall, and then I could pop that back row on their following turn, but I don't think it matters too much. I also would have had Owie online if I really wanted to go for it, but either way here, it should be fine, hopefully. They set 2 more back row. We draw into a Surstratus. We're going to summon out a Surstratus. That will get pulling the rug. We can't chain Owie to that, so unfortunately, we will indeed lose that Surstratus. They're going to pass back to us. We draw into a Turbulence here. We're just going to summon out the Turbulence because we want to get sort of more counters on the Surstratus when we bring that out. So we're going to go for a Smoke Ball here. And I'm just going to attack in. If they go for like a Dimpriz or something like that, we can Owie to get a good trade there if we want to. And that isn't what we're going to do because they do go for Dimpriz on the Turbulence here. I'm just going to Owie. I could also save the Owie just to tribute the Smoke Ball and just see what they get on their following turn. So that way it's kind of like Trap Dust Shoot, but better in that case. But I figured that this is perfectly fine to trade for this. And we'll see exactly what happens here. Unfortunately, I do get a little bit punished because they've got a Sidra in hand. So we could take the Sidra, but Mirror Force is a bit more of a threat for us, I think. I don't actually know here. Maybe it would have been better to take the Sidra and not the Mirror Force. I take the Mirror Force ultimately in this game, but I actually, in hindsight, it probably would have been better to take the Sidra because Sidra can get really aggressive on us. We don't really have a good way to deal with it. And the Mirror Force we can play around, right? Like we can just do Acid Cloud stuff to get rid of the Mirror Force. We don't necessarily have to be on the aggressive super early this game. So it probably would have been better to take the Sidra, but unfortunately I misplay here. I take the Mirror Force, and we do get a bit punished for that later because now I'm in a really bad spot. They've got Sidra coming down to beat over the Smoke Ball. I don't really have a way to deal with that. I set the Fog counter as a bluff there, but they do go for the Sidra. I do decide to solemn that because I'm like, well, you know, they need to draw into a Gladiator Beast this turn. It's not the least unlikely thing in the world because, like, you know, they do have a bunch of Glad Beasts left in deck, but I'm like, you know what? I'm going to put them on Gotta Have a Glad Beast. Unfortunately, they do indeed have a Glad Beast, so they're able to get in here and beat over the Smoke Ball. So, again, that's where I messed up there. I think I probably should have just, you know, taken the Sidra with the Owie, then Solemn with the Laquari here to prevent them from getting that online. But as is going to be pretty rough for us. They attack over the Smoke Ball and then pop the Cloudian Squall. I was kind of hoping they'd pop the Fog counter, which is Fog Control, that is, which is why I had it set there, but unfortunately they did not. We draw into Mirror Force, though, so that's pretty good. We can summon out a Surstratus here, set the Mirror Force, pass back to them. They go for smashing on our Surstratus, and they're going to tag in with the Bestiary. Now they can't tag into a Bestiary off of this, so I figure I'll let them tag out into something and then Mirror Force in the next turn, but unfortunately they don't tag out at all, so I just set a Dust Tornado, pass back to them. They go for a Bestiary here. I just go for Mirror Force there. And they're going to pass back to us. We draw to Altus, so that's something. We can put a Fog counter on it and attack in for 13. Pass back to them, see what they do. They're going to go for a Murmillo here, and they do have the Shrink in hand that we know about, so unfortunately, this will be able to attack over the Altus. They go for Vortex here, and yeah, we don't really have a way to stop that. We're just going to lose the game. We're just going to put 3 counters on the Murmillo just to do it, but it doesn't really matter here overall. They're just going to tag out probably. Oh, it looks like they don't tag out. Okay. Then, I mean, I don't really know what can do something here. I mean, if we draw into Altus, we can remove 3 counters off Murmillo. That's kind of cute, but like, it's not really the best. We draw into Fog Control. That's not going to do it. We just Dust Tornado just to see what it is. And then we mid defeat there. So we're going on to game 3. I should mention siding here. I sided out the Spirit Barriers. I sided out, let's see, I sided out the Spirit Barriers. I think I sided out some Diamond Dust Cyclones. So that's why I sided out as well, because I figured if they're just going to be tagging out their Glad Beasts, it doesn't really make sense to have the thing that kind of needs a bit of setup to pull off with the Diamond Dust Cyclone there. So I sided out those, and I brought in Spell Shield type 8s, and I brought in Dust Tornadoes, because I figured just sniping apart their back row is pretty good. And Spell Shield type 8 stops enemy control, it stops Shrink, it stops Smashing Ground. Actually, it might not stop Smashing Ground, because that doesn't target, I don't think. But it stops a lot of spells that Gladiator Beasts do use, so I figure it's a pretty good one there. We summon a Surstratus here, we contribute that next turn for the Rise Up. And they're going to go for a Sidra here. That is going to be fine by us. They go for a Laquari here, and that actually will solemn because them going into Murmillo to pop these Surstrats is kind of annoying for us. So we'll solemn that. They do have the Smashing. We can trade with the Owie to get a peek at their hand, see what they're working with here. See, they've got a Murmillo, a Book of Moon, and a Dimpriz. I think of those, I don't like the Murmillo the most because Murmillo can tag out into other Glad Beasts, so that's a bit rough for us. So we do want to just get rid of the Murmillo there and leave them with a Book and Dimpriz. They're attacking with the Sidra for 2,100, and they're going to set 2, pass back to us. We're going to draw a Dust Tornado, which is not the best here. We just set a Dust Tornado and a Fog Control as bluffs, but it will not matter. They just attack him with Sidra, and they win the game. So, yeah, it's kind of rough. Surprisingly, I think we actually maybe could have won this one if game 2 we had not misplayed by taking the Mirror Force instead of the Sidra. I also could have potentially held on to the Acid Cloud, not attacked into the Dimpriz, and then popped the Dimpriz later, but like, again, I think it was reasonable just to attack in there because it's not something they really expect that they'd keep in Dimpriz against Cloudians. But Yeah, the thing is that Gladiator Beasts, if they get one Gladiator Beast online and tagging out, then our deck's kind of cooked. So we still would have lost game two, but it's always good to take note in times where you misplayed and just see, what we could have done differently. And I think we maybe could have actually pulled this one out against the deck's hardest matchup if we had actually played game two better. But I think that these games definitely show the flaws in Cloudians. One, they don't have a way to kill, right? We managed to get a hand rip for 4 and not win a game because the Claudian monsters on their own are not really good enough to actually put on a ton of pressure to actually close out the deal after you've done that, right? We also, have to play a bunch of cards that sort of are not good on their own. Like they kind of similar to the flaw with Gladiator Beasts that you saw here. We need their Claudians to be online to actually use our cards, right? And if we don't draw into the Claudians that we need, then we're in kind of a tough spot, especially if we're drawing into things like Fog Control or Diamond Dust Cyclone. Instead of the Cloudians, right? Now you could potentially alleviate that problem by removing things like Fog Control and Diamond Dust Cyclone. But I do actually think Fog Control is pretty necessary for this deck at this point because it gives you a lot of flexibility in which effects you get to use. It also gives you another use of Smoke Ball, which is very nice. And Diamond Dust Cyclone is very good if you actually get it off. Of course, very hard to get off, but it is something that the deck does suffer in terms of removal, and it's another piece of removal. Now you could just play other removal cards instead. That's something you can do. If you want a Fisher or a Smashing Round or something like that, that is perfectly fine as well. But I feel like the draw is very nice if you actually get to pull that off, but maybe it would have just been better having generic removal. Even if you do put generic removal there, though, it still is awkward because then you're still in a similar spot to where you are before, where the deck on its own cannot do much, right? So yeah, I think that central flaw of the deck does hold it back. Of course, this was leaning more into the gimmicks of the deck with the Diamond Dust Cyclones. But, I don't know. Let me know your thoughts on the deck down below in the comments. I'm curious to hear what you all think about this. Did the deck perform better than you expected to? Did the deck perform worse than you expected to? How would you build this deck? And where do you think it lies in the Perfect Circle meta? Also, let me know what you thought about Perfect Circle format as a whole, because this will be the last video for a bit on Perfect Circle format. I'm going to be diving into Dad Return this weekend, and then next week as well. So hopefully we'll be able to get the rate of videos up. I've been busy IRL through the coverage of Perfect Circle, so I haven't been able to release as many as I'd like, but that should be changing within the next couple of weeks. So hopefully I can actually get out some more content for y'all as we dive into the end of GX, which is a very, very exciting time to see how it goes. But I hope that you would follow me on that journey there. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like down below if you like the content. Head on over to the YGO from Zero Discord server if you want to play games in these formats and want to play in the tournaments and locals as well. And yeah, as always, big shout out to my patrons, Rinspin, Porkchop, Coon, Bread Knocker, Tyler Compton, Geo Mindfest, Dump Truck, Scout Zero, and Damon Has. It means a lot that you all support it this way and encourage me to make more videos like this one in the future. But I hope you enjoyed as always. Until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero. I'm signing off. Peace.